It's from 1991. All right, here we have it. A little background story to this, besides the fact that I think this is one of the most incredible games played in the history of chess, not just a legendary moment for our legend of the day, but actually just one of the most sensational games played. And it's from the Linares tournament in 1991. And the top 14 players in the world at that time were playing at this event. This game is just a testimony of how creative and original Ivanchuk is in his play. So Garry starts with the Sicilian, knight f3, d6, and here Vasil went for bishop b5, perhaps with the idea that he wanted to avoid going into Garry's favorite knight off at the time. And after knight d7, he plays d4, knight f6, goes short castle. And the point is that, yes, the e4 pawn is on pre, but it's not a pawn that you want to take, because after rook e1, knight f6, you pick up on c5, your pieces are not developed. White is already having a lot of initiative. The pin here is going to be dangerous with the king stuck on e8. The king stuck on e8, a lot of problems. e4 is not a pawn you want to pick up. And after knight f6, short castle, Garry went on to take d4 and queen d4, centralizing the queen. Black went on to play a6, hitting white's bishop. And the entire concept of the game actually begins here. Vasily gives up trades. The his first bishop for the knight on d7. And after bishop d7, he went bishop g5. All right, I want to just back up here. Bishop d7, of course, c4 is a move that's been played several times and goes into a Maroczy kind of a setup. But this was not Vasil's idea when he did trade on d7. What he wanted to do was go bishop g5, and after h6, actually give up the bishop pair on f6. In return, ruin Black's pawn structure. But this is an extremely dynamic position. It's an extremely dynamic concept. You give up the double bishop, but you also give the g file, along which Black could potentially build an attack. And in return, you get this destroyed pawn structure. Now, against a beast like Garry Kasparov, a very aggressive and a very attacking player, this was not considered a normal thing to do at all. 21-year-old Ivanchuk went for it, goes c4, and now his plan is simply to try to build more space for his knights, and just pay attention to how he does it. After c4, e6, he first squeezes on the queen side, develops with knight c3, rook to c8, king h1. Garry not backing down, goes for attack, typical Garry stuff, and Ivanchuk continues with his plan of expanding on the queen side. h4, White's not afraid to parry Black's attack, simply goes h3, because you don't want to allow Black's pawn to go to h3, because then you're going to end up creating weaknesses on your king side. Develops with the bishop to e7 and continues expanding on the queen side, simply making sure that he does not allow Black's bishops to become dangerous. In fact, in this entire game, he just continued to take away activity of Black's bishop. And after a5 goes b5, taking away the c6 square from the bishop. You, of course, don't want to open the position when you're playing against bishops, but he grabs a lot of space in the position. Queen c7, hitting the pawn on c4. Knight goes to d2, defending the pawn. And here, Black offers a queen trade, which, of course, Vasil refuses. When you've got a space advantage, just a general rule, you try and keep the pieces on the board, heavy pieces as well as minor pieces. He goes queen d3, rook g8, putting pressure along the g file. And now Vasil goes rook to e1, just centralizing his pieces. Queen g5 with a threat on g2. White plays rook g1, defending the g2 pawn. Queen f4, hitting the f2 pawn. Rook f1, defending the f2 pawn. And if Black went b6. And now a really stunning idea by Vasily of course, all over the board, played over the board. Knight e2, first hitting the queen. Queen goes back to h6. Now the absolutely brilliant, shattering black's queen side, c5. I think this is one of the most stunning moves in the history of chess. I think this one and Peter Lecko's queen d3 in his match against Kramnik in game 8 are two moves that are just stuck in my head. So c5, black can take it with the b pawn, with the d pawn, with the rook on c8, but it doesn't matter. White's next move is going to be what he played. And the main point of c5 is that he vacates the c4 square for his knight. And this is a deadly square because it's going to hit on d6 as well as b6. Black continued rook c5 and knight to c4. The engines, today's engines, give this position as already better for white and suggest that maybe it was time for black to sacrifice the exchange, but there isn't enough compensation and white's already better. After king f8, you could pick up the d6 pawn, but picking up the b6 pawn not just hits the bishop, but also you're creating an extremely dangerous passer, and it's just 3 moves away from game over for black. Bishop falls back on e8. White now advances on the king side. So first, step 1, squeeze on the queen side, make sure the activities of the bishop is just completely, the bishops are completely dead. Goes c5, vacates the square of c4 for the knight. And now look at the symmetry of it. c4, c5, and now goes with f4, f5. I think it's absolutely brilliant the way this game was played. So f5 was a huge threat, because of which black played f5. White takes on f5, takes back with the rook, and white occupies the open file. The point is that he's threatening to come in with rook c8 or rook c7. Absolute disaster for black. Garry tries to run away with the king, but the problem with this is that this allows a very suitable time for playing the g4 break. And why does it work so well here? Because, and it's timed just perfectly, is because after h3, queen g3, the king can't move because white's going to pick up the rook. And if you go queen g6, white simply goes queen c3 and picks up the queen. So a superbly timed g4 comes on the board. Rook goes to c5 because there's really no other square on the board. Vasily trades the rooks and goes knight c8, again hitting the bishop. Black falls back on f8. Vasily continues to put pressure on these two bishops with queen to d8, attacking this bishop. No squares left for the bishop to go. Garry does what Garry does best. He looks for counterplay and he plays queen g6. And the point is that if white grabs on e8, black wants to go queen d3, giving him some counterplay. Rook g2 runs into queen h3, king runs, queen e3 check, king f1, and now really nice move c4. And the point is that suddenly the bishop is coming to c5 and getting activated. The h pawn and the c pawn both passes. This actually gives black a lot of counterplay. So queen g6, a really nice resource by Garry. But Vasily's not going to allow any of it, and he goes f5. After f5, black played queen h6, again threatening to come to e3, to enter with the queen, to give some counterplay if you take on e8. And actually, that works well for black. Vasily stops it again with g5. After g5, Garry continuing to insist on his idea to gain play with the queen, goes to h5. Vasily stops it again. And now black grabs on f5, knight comes to f4, hitting the queen. And this is so similar to what just happened on the queen side. You guys remember with c4, c5, knight jumping to c4, f4, f5, knight jumping to f4. So just complete symmetry, and black's position just collapses after queen h8. Queen f6 check, and it's actually mate in 2 from here. King h7 and rook h4. Garry resigned here, and this is how the 21-year-old Vasily Ivanchuk beat the then world champion, who one of the greatest all-time players of chess in his absolute prime. If you show this position to anybody on the planet without telling them who's black and who's white, I don't think their 50th or even their 500th guess would be that black is Garry Kasparov here.